Okay, I think we're ready to start, and I'm going to ask those of you from Hack to Ham to begin.
Sounds good. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa and I'm a senior at Cheltenham High School. Hack the Ham started with my officers team, Chris, Jared, Malcolm, Seth, myself, and Mrs. Putterman. The idea started around November 2019, where we originally planned our first in-person hackathon for March 2020, but due to COVID, it was forced to be virtual for April 2020. For our December 2020 hackathon, it was our second hackathon and biggest yet far. We included both our middle school and high school students with over 130 participants and 70 projects submitted. We originally actually planned it for only 60 people since we had around 40 people in the spring of 2020. But when we did pre-registration, it was more than double our expected amount. Our goal was to grow computer science interest within our district, so in order to have that, we made sure it was beginner-friendly with workshops in App Lab, web development, and Scratch. For our sponsors, our mission altogether was to inspire more diversity in tech, have them connect with the youth, and grow the tech industry from early on passion.
Hi, my name is Seth, and I am also a senior at Cheltenham High School. So we had many different prize categories. We had most creative, most applicable. We had best newcomer, best overall. We also had one called the Best Chop Dog Award, which is one of our sponsors. So it was an app category. And we specifically included prizes for both middle schoolers and high schoolers that allowed students to compete in 2 different competitions. We also watched to see the ability level and the learning that seemed to take place over the weekend. Some students earned newcomer prizes because they improved skills tremendously throughout the event. Everyone who participated in our event received swag. We had t-shirts, stickers, bags, keychains, and they all received handwritten thank you letters for their participation, as well as certificates. We hope that they remember their experiences and join us for future events. All participants had the opportunity to meet with student leaders one-on-one in order to explain their project.
How can other schools start something like this?
I'll chime in. So success of this event depended on the energy and commitment of our student leaders like Lisa and Seth. It'll be felt in this community for years to come. Because we focused on efforts on drawing in students from the younger grades, we had 6th grade and older, we'll have students in the coming years who already have positive experiences in computer science. Our student leaders were reaching out into classrooms for students to sign up. They were looking for sponsors and managing the advertising. They designed the t-shirts and the swag items. We even had guest speakers from local businesses and from our alumni network. Our student leaders managed each of these sessions, questioning the guests, managing the chat, and generally making the event nearly completely student run. Many of our student leaders and participants have formed bonds with each other, and many have a mentor-like relationship now. Our hackathon had many social events, such as game night and Q&A sessions. These outlets provided great interactions with the participants, especially during quarantine when social interactions were limited. Considering we were fully virtual at this point in the school year, it was amazing to see so many students join us for the sessions. We had students with us for up to 12 hours each day of the hackathon. There was a lot of energy because it was social, just as much as it was about computer science.
Also, as an added bonus, we now have established relationships with local businesses. We are learning about companies in our area who are building apps, using new technology, and all of our students are seeing how computer science leads to jobs and businesses right here around us in Cheltenham and Philadelphia area. Our guest today is Dr. Jay Frye, President and CEO of Identimetrics. What some of you may already know is Identimetrics is the #1 provider of biometrics in K-12 education. What you may not know is that Dr. Frye was also a former principal and school administrator, so he comes to us with a wealth of hands-on practical experience.
Thank you, Lisa, Seth, and Mrs. Putterman, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We were delighted to sponsor these young people on their Hack the Ham technology adventure in order to support greater technology awareness in our schools. As Seth said, I'm the former principal of a middle school of over 1,000 students. Every day, we were putting out fires related to student and staff identification, lost and forgotten ID cards, shared ID numbers, miskeyed ID numbers, and the resulting inaccurate records all resulted in a tremendous waste of time and frustration for my teachers and staff. What we needed was an ID solution so we could feel less stress in managing all we had to get done in a day. That's why we created Identimetrics almost 20 years ago. What used to take an office staff hundreds of hours a year to manage now takes hardly any time. And those inaccurate records and time-consuming audits are a thing of the past. Today, I'm going to discuss why K-12 schools are embracing biometric technology. In addition, I'll describe safe student ID solutions during COVID-19, which presents yet another challenge that school administrators are all facing. We'll end the presentation with any questions you may have. Let's get started. Biometrics are automated methods of recognizing a person based on a physiological or behavioral characteristic. For example, fingerprint, facial, iris, palm print, speech, vein recognition, anything that's a part of you. Fingerprint recognition is by far the most adopted technology. The technology is mature, trusted, cost-effective, and easy to use. Biometrics is not a new technology. The ancient Egyptians used body characteristics to identify workers to make sure they didn't get more provisions than they were entitled. Chinese merchants in the 14th century used palm prints and footprints to identify children. Fingerprint biometrics began to be scientifically developed at the end of the 19th century with the work of Sir Francis Galton. Galton detailed the first classification system for biometrics and identified 3 types of characteristics for fingerprints: loop, whorl, and arch, which are still in use today. Fingerprinting technology began to become a widespread use in the United States in the early 20th century. It's the oldest biometric method that has been successfully used for many decades in numerous applications. Each of our 10 fingerprints is different from one another and from those of every other person. Even identical twins have unique fingerprints. That makes them ideal for personal identification. When people think about biometrics today, they often think about security for their smartphones or banking applications. What most people don't realize is that biometrics, specifically finger scanning biometrics, have been used in schools in the US for more than 20 years. There are more than 2 million students who use biometrics every day in their schools in 48 states, US territories, and international American schools. West Virginia, a pioneer in biometrics in K-12 education, is leading the country with over 70% of their districts using biometrics in their schools. West Virginia also has been leading the country in school breakfast participation for 4 years in a row. Biometrics plays a big part in implementing efficient breakfast programs so more children can eat. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that students be given enough time to eat their school lunch. One study showed that biometrics increased lunch line efficiency by about 23%. This means enough time for children to eat and more children who can have a nourishing meal. Biometrics can speed tardy student identification and processing up to 93%, allowing students quickly to get to class, improving their instructional experience, and freeing up valuable staff time to be used for more important educational activities. Biometrics for staff time and attendance can significantly improve administrative operations and efficiency by reducing payroll errors, which account for up to 7% of total payroll costs. Biometrics also appears to be the most effective method for preventing time theft or buddy punching, which costs up to 7% of gross payroll annually. According to the studies by the American Payroll Association, 43% of employees interviewed admitted to committing some sort of time theft. There are several significant differences between law enforcement fingerprinting application and consumer finger scanning identification software. Fingerprinting captures rolled images of all 10 fingers. Rolled images capture unique identifying points on the entire finger's surface in order to collect the maximum number of unique identifying points. The purpose is to identify suspects based upon fingerprint images taken directly from a crime scene. On the other hand, finger scanning uses flat images of only 2 fingers to create templates. Flat images reveal the center of the finger and require only a minimum of unique identifying points in order to make a match. The purpose is to identify a person who is already voluntarily enrolled in a software for the expressed purpose of identification. So how does finger scanning biometrics work? The finger is scanned by the finger scanner. The software identifies unique points. Note that no fingerprint images are stored. The points are transferred to a binary number. The number is encrypted, linked to the user's ID number, and stored in the database. When the user returns, the same process happens and the new template is compared to the database until a match is identified. The matching ID number is sent to the host application and the user's account is found. All of this happens in about a second with a false acceptance rate of 1 in 200 million. It is not possible to recreate the fingerprint from this data, and privacy is ensured. One of the many challenges facing school administrators today is accurately and quickly identifying students. The bottom line is that schools receive federal and state funds based on accurate and auditable records. For example, accurate records in the cafeteria and food service programs are critical for reimbursement from the federal government's $14 billion National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. In addition, schools need to ensure a safe and secure environment for everyone on campus. Nationwide, more than 2 million students are using biometrics every day throughout their schools. Their school administrators and technology teams want to take control of their ID management headaches so they can focus on educating their students and running their programs. They've realized that the outdated methods of identification like ID cards, PIN numbers, pencil and paper, and visual identification were draining their time and resources and creating real problems every day. Now, more than ever, accurate student identification is key to the efficient operations of our schools. Schools in the US and worldwide have been implementing biometrics in order to identify students, deliver accurate and auditable student records, and ensure a safer and more secure environment for the students, teachers, and staff. Many areas in any school require identification. The most common kinds of identification currently used are picture ID cards, personal identification numbers or PINs, and of course, visual identification. Each of these methods creates its own issues and is a drain on the time and resources of IT departments. Cards are regularly forgotten, lost, mutilated, and shared. PINs are easily forgotten, swapped, or stolen. Also, visual identification is a poor solution, especially with today's considerable security concerns and employee turnover. By using biometrics for identification, the problems and costs associated with the current methods are avoided and new standards of accountability are put into place. Virtually all cafeteria debit systems use swipe cards or PINs. Schools are now using finger scanning biometrics to eliminate the expense and problems associated with these systems and to ensure accurate reporting. Finger scanning biometrics are also being used in the classroom for grab-and-go breakfast and lunch, on food carts and food trucks, and in vending machines to increase reimbursements and decrease costs. Biometrics ensure that student accounts are secure, eliminating the time and expense for investigating and paying for student account breaches. The School Nutrition Association also encourages the evaluation of biometric technology to enhance efficiency and effectiveness in school nutrition program management. As the National Center on Time and Learning suggests, learning takes time. Every second of a class meeting matters, and taking attendance requires time. With today's innovative learning solutions like student-directed resource centers, attendance taking is even more complex. Finger scanning biometrics streamlines this administrative task that is a critical part of a classroom management. Finger scanning biometric solutions eliminate errors by creating accountability and transparency. Hidden costs are dramatically reduced. Productivity and efficiency are significantly improved. There are many uses for finger scanning biometrics and attendance. For example, meeting attendance in the classroom, daily attendance at the front entrance or homeroom, tardy management and early dismissal, minute-based attendance, simulated workplace in the classroom, secondary school and college dual credit accounting, individualized learning programs, open campus solutions and clocking in and out. In addition, teachers of large classes such as band, orchestra, chorus, study hall, and physical education can use the entire classroom period for instruction instead of using valuable time to take attendance. Today's school libraries are complex media centers. School libraries store hundreds of thousands of dollars of schools' assets such as books, periodicals, records, and pieces of art. Librarians are using finger scanning biometrics to replace library cards, eliminating the sharing of library cards with students who have overdue materials, as well as speeding up the checkout process. A controlled environment is critical to a school's success. Access to the school must be permitted only to authorized persons. Students, teachers, staff, and frequent visitors can be accurately time-stamped and identified using finger scanning biometric technology and attendance or check-in applications. Administrators then have an irrefutable record of the date and time of each person's entry into the building. Finger scanning biometric systems can assure administrators that those entering their schools are authorized to be there. School nurses are charged with dispensing medication to students every day. In many schools, teachers and substitutes dispense medication when the school nurse is unavailable. Finger scanning biometrics provides an irrefutable record of medication dispensing and reduces the risk of potential life-threatening errors, a growing concern with more and more medication being dispensed every day. School students get lost or get off at wrong schools and bus stops every day, especially young students. New bus drivers are hired throughout the school year due to turnover. This makes it difficult for them to get to know the students well enough to visually identify them and where they belong. School districts use finger scanning biometrics on buses in order to help the drivers know if the students are on the correct bus and that they get off at the correct stop. Parents know in real time exactly when and where their child got off the bus. In case of emergencies, school administrators know in real time which children are still on the bus. Finger scanning biometric time and attendance solutions eliminate errors by creating accountability and transparency. Hidden costs of payroll are dramatically reduced. Productivity efficiency are significantly improved. Finger scanning biometrics eliminates buddy punching, dramatically reduces the time it takes to fill out, submit, and approve timesheets, and reduces overtime payments by creating accountability. Employees know that they are being monitored and cannot get away with arriving late, taking long breaks, and making early departures. Finger scanning biometrics also improves scheduling for better workforce utilization by eliminating unnecessary overtime costs caused by an unbalanced distribution of work. Finger scanning biometrics can assist large schools in hallway monitoring. This technology can also be applied to off-site student identification for field trips and outdoor events. Emergency identification as a result of a fire or school shooting evacuation is a critical use of this technology. Other applications include student identification at athletic events and school dances. Is the use of biometrics safe during COVID-19? Yes, biometric finger scanners are still a safe, hygienic solution for student and staff ID management in schools during COVID-19. According to the CDC, the transmission of COVID-19 to persons from surfaces contaminated with the virus has not currently been documented. That means that contact transmission is unlikely the main way that COVID-19 virus spreads. According to Dr. Joseph Allen, Associate Professor of Exposure Assessment Science and Director of the Healthy Buildings Program from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, there isn't a single documented case of COVID-19 transmission from surfaces. Not one. The reality is that the novel coronavirus spreads mainly through the air. Any potential transmission from surface contact can be prevented through regular hand washing or use of hand sanitizer. Dr. Allen and his colleagues suggested that much of the extra cleaning that organizations have been doing is unnecessary. The time and money required for such efforts would be better directed elsewhere. Since the vast majority of transmission occurs through the air, we should shift our efforts and resources toward cleaning shared air rather than shared surfaces. These suggestions are in line with the CDC recommendations. Dr. Allen and his colleagues from Harvard have published several articles and participated in presentations outlining specific science-based guidelines for the safe opening of schools. A recent webinar sponsored by the School Superintendents Association entitled Healthy School Buildings, Evidence-Based Choices in Safe School Openings is an excellent resource. We'll email you a link to this informative presentation. Let's watch an excerpt of Dr. Allen answering questions about the safety of biometrics during COVID-19.
Here's an interesting question I have too as well. Some schools are, of course, have used in the past pin pads, finger scanners, that sort of thing, for a variety of things, whether it's, lunchrooms, etc. All students touch them because you said that we're over cleaning our schools and surfaces. Does that mean that we can return to using those kinds of things now?
Yeah, so fomite transmission, fomite's just the word we use for any inanimate object that can act as a source of transference, right? So it's touchpads, a pencil could be a fomite, a doorknob, a railing. And if you look at all the data on fomite transmission, we actually don't have any confirmed cases through fomite transmission. Now, can it happen? Absolutely, it can happen. Is it driving this pandemic? No way. You could think about, like, for example, the choir outbreak. It's hard to see how you get like a 90% attack rate. 90% of the people got sick from one person through touching a surface, right? As soon as the second person touched a contaminated surface, you're going to remove a lot of the virus. But it's easy to see how through shared air, you could get an attack rate that high. So if fomite transmission is happening, it's not happening that much and it's not driving this pandemic. I'll also say this, it's easy to control through hand washing or use of hand sanitizer. So absolutely, we have to continue hand washing, hand sanitizer. That's a better way to break the chain of transmission. Because think about the logic of the surface cleaning we do, right? We clean all the surfaces, but it's impossible to clean it after every person has touched it. It's not practical, it's not possible. So already we're kind of, accepting that that's happening. And the better way to do it is to, in our report, we talk about building a culture of health, safety, and shared responsibility. Of course, stay home when you're sick. Hand wash when you come into the school. Every time you enter a classroom, every time you exit a classroom. So if you're building this into the culture, it's the better way and more effective way of breaking the transmission chain from any surfaces.
Here's an interesting question.
Rob Woods, associate principal at Avon High School in Ohio, uses biometrics for his tardy management. Let's watch what he has to say about using biometrics in this new world of COVID-19.
In a COVID world that we're living in now, this product actually is an enormous solution. When you come into schools now, because this is what we're living in terms of planning, you're going to walk into plexiglass at that front counter, if you guys didn't know this yet, probably across the country. And you're going to probably, by and large, see kids wearing masks, except at lower levels. So when that kid comes in late, can you imagine having a plexiglass wall up? Secretary's wearing her mask, the kid is wearing his mask. What's your name, honey? Because you can't really recognize the kid, right? You can only see right here. The whole thing is so clean and fit for a pandemic world. I hadn't even put my mind actually to that final thought of, oh my gosh, they're not even writing passes. They're just taking this fresh thermal printout and going. Honest to God, it's fantastic.
Eventually, schools will open to full-time attendance, not only with the same challenges as before, but with new challenges. For example, the difficulty in communication caused by wearing masks. School districts continue to see the value in finger scanning biometrics, not in spite of these times, but because of these times. Not only is finger scanning biometrics simple, easy, and safe, it also provides the additional value of efficiency, accountability, and most importantly, safety. None of this has changed. I hope this webinar has been helpful to you as you prepare for the time when our school days eventually return to normal. The benefits of using biometric technology for student identification still stand. Safety, efficiency, accuracy, and accountability. Thank you. We'll be emailing you each a recording of the webinar along with a link to Dr. Allen's presentation. Let's open up for some questions now. So you can just to step in there, you can submit a question in the chat window, and I'll be glad to answer the question, but I'll start with one, and that question has to do with privacy. And so it's one of the key concerns that of questions that I get from time to time regarding privacy and the student fingerprint images. So the software is, first of all housed behind the school's network. All of the software resides at the school or the district level and is protected by all of the same web or firewall protections that they have for the district. None of that is in the cloud. None of that is hosted by any of the companies that are selling the software. And secondly, the software only takes minutia images, as you saw earlier in the slide that described how the biometrics work. Secondly, the templates are encrypted with a 256-bit encryption code. And lastly on that is, if anyone were to even possibly break that code, all they would get is a group of dots which would not tell them what the fingerprint looks like. Identimetrics, as well as other software companies that work in the school market, you sign a pledge, which is the Student Safety Pledge, which commits the company to making sure all of the software protects student identification and student information. And of course, Identimetrics was one of the very first signers of that pledge.
So how much does a system like this cost?
You can start, well, they vary from company to company, of course. With Identimetrics, you can start for as little as $2,500. We customize the software and the implementation to the school's needs. So after a conversation with our sales representatives, we can provide a quote so you can get an idea of exactly what it would cost to do what you want to do in your district.
Got another question here that's
oh, go ahead.
They've talked about the school security data in the computer science classes at school, and we're wondering how safe the data itself is.
The data is quite safe. As I said, the templates themselves are encrypted and stored in a database that's also at the school or district level. So it's protected by the same firewalls that protect all of the other student information that it's at those districts as well.
How easy is it to enroll in something like this?
It's easier to enroll in our software and in most biometric software than it is to make a student identity card. The basic information of name and ID number is imported into the software, and the student themselves then needs to scan their left index finger 3 times and their right index finger 3 times. That takes about 30 seconds. And once that's done, the student is enrolled in the software. And unlike making student identifications every year or every time they transition from school to school, that data is done. So if a student enrolls in 5th grade, they don't need to enroll ever again in their time in the district. I also find that as far as safety goes, there is nothing for a student to lose. However, if they use an ID card, there is a card, usually with the student's picture, their name, and their school. And those, as school administrators know, and students too, are easily lost and frequently lost. And those can be found by other persons and used to help identify a student. So safety is better with the biometric than with the ID card.
I got another question here. How easy is it to get started with Identimetrics?
Identimetrics has a 5-step plan for having people brought into our system, the 5-step plans, and so it makes it very, very easy to bring you into the system. We start with orientation. We then discuss how the software would be deployed and configured. There's an installation process, which our team does online. And then we train the school personnel on how to enroll, which I just described and which you can see on our website in one of the videos. And then we do a final system check because we want to make sure everything is successfully in place and the system is ready to roll out before the school starts using the biometrics. Once that's done, the upkeep and maintenance is a minimum because you simply need to add new students or delete students as they leave the district. And the configurations only need to change if hardware or software input is needed to change.
Good question here that says, who are some of the companies that you partner with?
Oh, well, there are about, well over 100 companies in the market of education that our software will interface with, which includes all of the cafeteria applications, the library applications that are used. We partner with Powerschool to provide input for late attendance and early dismissal. And in a video that you saw, that was actually an it was Powerschool that we were communicating with to provide those passes. And there are a host of other companies that we communicate with. The nice thing about the software is it's designed to be a platform which can be used throughout the school so that a single biometric identification can be used to the applications throughout the school that are used to identify students. It's what you would call a single sign-on solution so that one is used for many. And then in the event that the school decides to change, let's say, for instance, the cafeteria point of sale software, and by the way, that's a frequently changed piece of software in schools, we simply reconfigure for the new application that comes in. And an example of that is state of West Virginia, where about 70% of the school districts there use our software for their cafeteria application. And several years ago, when they were changing from a application that we had configured to communicate with to a new one, we got calls from lots of food service managers asking if they were going to have to return to cards and ID numbers or PIN pads with this new POS application. They were concerned about that because it meant remanaging all their ID for the students. We simply reconfigured the output of our software to the receiving input of the new POS application. And in the fall, when the students returned, they did what they had always done with the cafeteria the year before. Students came through the line, scanned their fingers, we identified to the new application. And the only thing that had to be done differently was that the cafeteria workers had to learn how to operate a new POS application. So it made it very easy for them to keep their biometric ID management system in place and continue identifying their students.
There's another question here that says there was an interesting picture of a tablet with a bracket in the presentation. How is that used by schools?
Students use the mobile device to identify students in remote locations. So for instance, we have a customer that has a lot of food trucks outside of the actual cafeteria. And as long as they have a Wi-Fi connection and they are using a Windows-based tablet, they can add a bracket with biometrics on it, connect that way, and they can identify anywhere that they have that Wi-Fi connection. So they'll use it for the food truck during cafeteria or to use as a snack bar in a remote location, for instance, outside the building. They will also use it as students enter to games. Let's say there's a football game where students who have an identity, have paid their activity fees, can go to the game free, but students from other schools have to pay or buy a ticket. And as every student knows, that whether or not you attend the high school that you're going to the game for, you are a student at that high school if the question comes up, do you go to school here because you get in free? And so by using the biometrics, they can identify the students that are in the school, and they can then eliminate free entry for many students who are not. Schools come up with a lot of other ways of using them. They have actually used it for, in the case of school evacuation, especially with active shooter drills, in which they evacuate to a remote location and need to identify all of the students that are at that location in a quick and efficient way. And this allows them to do that as well. So, and I'm always surprised at the way students come up with different ways of using it. In fact, one school district used our software to be sure that no one voted twice in the student government elections.
That somewhat ties into a next question here. That's is there an age range that kids need to fall under in order to use a biometric finger scanner?
We've actually enrolled students or children as young as 3. So the software is very effective. Generally speaking, schools will start with their kindergarten students, and it actually, for the cafeteria purposes, it particularly makes it very easy to identify those students when they go in the cafeteria, because as you know, 5-year-olds usually don't say their names very loud when asked, and they don't remember numbers. And so when I was an administrator, we resorted to all kinds of things like putting something around their neck with their number on it, or giving them a popsicle stick with the number written on it before they went to the cafeteria, or lining them up in alphabetical order if you could, but of course then they got out of order. And so all of these kinds of things that were put in place were eliminated, and especially the need to line them up in any specific order when they used biometrics, because they could simply go to the cafeteria, put their finger on the scanner, and be identified. And by the way, as I said earlier, if you enroll the child, let's say in first grade or kindergarten, and that student stays in the school for the next 12 years through graduation, no need to re-enroll them, reissue ID numbers, or issue or reissue ID cards.
Looks like we have one more question here. Do you have plugins for Powerschool attendance?
Yes, we have several plugins for Powerschool attendance, which really streamlines the whole attendance process in the school. The most common one is one used for late attendance or early dismissal. It eliminates the need for the person in the attendance office to ask the student name, to look them up, to put in a code, to handwrite a pass, and streamlines all that down to just a few seconds, because they simply scan and the code goes directly into Powerschool and a pass is issued. Also allows them to put in a counter which would count the number of tardies the student has had and automatically assign them to some kind of disciplinary action. All of that comes out written on the pass. We also have a plugin that allows schools, particularly in those states which require minute-based attendance, to be able to count the time in minutes that the student is in attendance in the school. That's very helpful to them for state reporting. And there's a meeting-based plugin which allows school districts or schools to take attendance of students as they move from class to class. One of the problems in a lot of the larger classes, let's say band or physical education, is that you may have anywhere between 50 and 100 or more students in one class. Taking attendance is a very time-consuming thing, and it also is prone to lots of inaccuracies. So using the finger scanning for meeting attendance in those classes frees up the time of the teacher so they can focus more on instructional time in the class, and gives them a more accurate record of who is in the class itself. And those are the primary ones. And in fact, there's a large school district that's right now rolling out the meeting attendance plug-in in order to streamline their attendance in classrooms. Do we have time for one more here, Brian?
It looks like one final question here. If we wanted to use the Identimetrics for next year when school opens, when should we start that process?
We recommend starting in the spring. What that does is allows you to have time to enroll all of the students in the biometric software before the end of the school year. So all of the students except those who are leaving would be enrolled. You then have time in the late spring and in the summer to install and configure the software on the machines and in the locations in the school that you want to use it, so that when you start the school year in the fall, all of the students come back ready to begin at the beginning of the school year. Well, I think that sums up our questions. And unless there's anything else from the panel, and let me give you just a second to see if there's any panel response from our friends from Cheltenham.
It was fascinating what you were sharing, especially the business about storing the binary code for the fingerprint. That was really interesting.
Well, thank you. We've been doing this a long time, and as a former principal, one of my concerns was protecting student identification and efficiently and accurately identifying them. And as I have said before, if I had been able to, I had promised my secretary that we would find a solution for this problem. And when we couldn't find one in the marketplace, we built one that would actually meet my needs and the needs of other schools, as well as protect student identification. And if I had found a solution like that in the marketplace earlier, I probably would be retiring from a superintendency now. But I've been very happy to work with a marvelous team to build an application which I hope meets the needs of schools and students to simplify their school day. So, and thank you very much for the hackathon folks and all of the things you've done. I think it's a terrific way to introduce kids to technology, and especially what you're doing at this point. We are currently well ensconced in an age of technology and computer applications. And when I have to say, we are there, well, like it or not, we're there. So everybody needs to be involved, especially the students that are most commonly using it now. So thank you very much for all you've done for the students at Cheltenham and the surrounding school districts. And hopefully people throughout the country will see your example and take a lesson from it.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing everything about your company too. It's just fascinating.
You're quite welcome, and we look forward to being in
presentation.
touch with you again next year at the hackathon time.
Okay, we look forward to it.
Okay,
All right.
Brian, I think that sums it up for us, and we want to thank everybody for coming. And I'm sure that if you have any questions, you can reach out to us and we'll be glad to help.